Hello, my name is Robert Love, and today I'm going to be speaking about distributed version control systems. Uh, we are going to focus on Git. However, if you are familiar with Mercurial or know about Mercurial, it'll also apply there. It'll also apply in general to a lot of the first 10 minutes of this presentation will be focused in distributed version control in general. To start off with, many of us are coming from a background of a centralized server model, such as Subversion or CVS, uh, other, even SourceSafe, for, um, you know, uh, or maybe not even coming from a model at all. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the centralized model and then compare it and how it applies to the distributed. So in this case, we have a diagram representing 3 developers, and they're all communicating with a centralized repository. There is only one repository in this model, and it's right there at the top. And the developers can have one or more working copies of their code on their machines. Any kind of operation, such as a checkout or looking at the logs or switching branches, just updating the changes from others, those all require you to be connected to that centralized repository. So if the central repository goes down, your ability to work with the version control system is 100% toast. You don't have an option. Now let's look at a distributed model. In the distributed model, um, you still could have a centralized repository. However, it's optional. Another thing is you could have developers communicating with each other. And the reason this works is that everybody, in this case, we have those 3 developers down there, they have each of them have a full copy of the repository. If you put a centralized repository, say, on a server, uh, that would also have uh, a full copy. You could have multiple servers, um, and they also can communicate. You have many options here as far as how you communicate. And how does that really work? Because the repository being on everybody's computer gives us the ability to check out, update, commit, view history, create or switch branches, and many other things. But they all occur on your local machine. There's a side benefit to this, and that is I have a Subversion repository that takes about 45 minutes to do a checkout. After I have that initial checkout, it then takes about 30 minutes to do a switch if I want to switch branches. That same amount of data in Subversion, the clone operation, which is the initial checkout similarity, it takes about the same amount of time. It still takes a fair amount of time to bring that down. However, um, it is the switching operation, switching from branch to branch, is nearly instantaneous. And so the clone here copies one repository from one location to another. This allows us to say, hey, I have that centralized repository that we're all sharing, and I can clone that down to my machine. And then I use commands like fetch, push, and pull, and they are used to communicate changes between repositories. These can also happen between developers. So 2 developers could choose to be working together on a smaller project, and once they've got their changes in sync, they can then, one of them or both, depending on how they've worked, could be sending those on up to the centralized repository. Typically, it'd only be one of them. So let's give another diagram to kind of show a possible workflow. Here we have on our working local machine, we have a working directory, a staging area, and the actual Git repository. The repository is a directory, and inside of it there's going to be a Git directory, and that Git directory contains that repository with your code just sitting side by side with it. And then we have an external repository that you have read-write access to. So for that, I would start off with a clone operation. The clone would then copy the files from the remote server or the external repository, wherever it really may lie. It could be another developer's machine, down to the local machine. With that, you need to check out a branch. Now, it could be the main branch, it could be, but you're always working in a branch. Given that, you can also create a new branch. You could also say, hey, from this specific spot, I need a branch, and I'm going to start working. And once I've now got it in my working directory, I'm able to edit the files, work on those files. After I've done that, I then can stage those files. This is a really quick operation, but basically I need to stage the files, say these are the ones that I'm going to send back up, where I can then finally commit. After I commit, I then can push my changes to that read-write repository. And I get to choose to push those changes by branch. So I could say I have 5 branches. I only want to push the changes for this one branch. So I get a little flexibility of what I want to push out. It gives me some internal abilities to manage how I want to present the work I've done to the rest of my team or the world. Anytime during this process, I can pull updates from the external repository into my repository. I can also do something called fetch. Fetch just says, give me the list of changes. I have them, I can switch to them, but I cannot, but a pull is a fetch, and then it also updates my current working copy to be what I need. So we have lots of options here, but basically this allows me to get those changes back that others may have pushed into that repository. Now let's look at a different model. When you look at Git, you're going to find that it's used heavily in the open source world. And with that, there's a lot of repositories in the open source world that have read-only access for most of us. And with that, the same operation to clone and check out, edit your file, stage, and commit, that still stays the same. The big difference here is there's a code reviewer that has write access. And that code reviewer, you're able to, you send them a pull request. Now this can be done, there's several technologies related to how pull requests work. And an example is if you were to use a product like GitHub, which is a hosting service, a pull request is implemented in their own proprietary format. As Bitbucket has its own, and there's actually a pull request that's built into the Git client itself that's more designed for more of an offline, say, I get to have my changes set up in a pull request with that I can then attach to an email and then send. With that, the code reviewer, regardless of how they get that pull request, gets a chance to review it. And when they do, they can say, hey, send it again. Send that pull request with a different set of changes, because obviously we didn't like it. But if they accept that change, they then push those changes to that external repository. With that, they can ultimately allow you to, well, at that point, your changes are visible in the external repository where you can pull that change back down at any time. So that's basically some real high-level discussions. To start off our next little section here, we're going to look at the Git command line for just a few seconds. We're not going to spend an awful lot of time discussing how to operate Git from a command line. There are a couple of URLs I'm going to present you, that are really, really good tutorials to learn the command line. And I don't think that this type of presentation lends itself well to learning a command line well. Instead, we're going to look at some graphical clients that are out there that will do a good portion of what the command line can do. The command line is the primary client, so it can always do more. So if there's something strange that you find that you need in your operations, uh, there is a very good chance that it can be done from the command line, even if you can't find a way to do it in whatever GUI you have. Now, there are several GUIs that are out there. Some of them are commercial that you have to pay for. Some have different degrees of functionality. Ultimately, uh, the one I like the best is Sourcetree, and I'm going to use that to demo. The unique thing about Sourcetree is its client works for both Mercurial and for Git in the same interface. So it does highlight the fact that with distributed version control, they are very much the same. So after we get those, don't worry too much about not being able to, if you didn't get these URLs, I'll have them up as the last slide in the presentation today. Okay, I've switched over to a Windows machine where I have Git installed. With this, I can use the command line. From that, I have the basic Git. It starts with the Git command line and the subcommand that you want to run. In this case, it's clone. Like I said, this is probably the most we're going to do with the command line, but I wanted to show this and compare it to, say, the graphical interface that we're going to show 2 seconds from now. The next thing is the URL for the remote repository and the directory I want to place that in. So if I run this, it will clone the dUnitX. You'll see it come down. And now, if I do a directory, I can see the dUnitX directory and all the files for that at the latest. This is the latest version of the code. But the whole history is sitting there on my machine. So we're going to get out of the command line. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to paste in that same URL, and we're going to and I'm just going to call it the directory I want to put it in, dUnitX Sourcetree. Down here, there's a bookmark. There's a repository. That basically shows up on the left as the list of all of the bookmarks that you may, of the various repositories you have. This will work for both Git or Mercurial, and it does detect what type of repository it is. There's a really quick, cool button here that says Browse Hosted Projects. So if you have a GitHub account, anything that you've starred will quickly show up, or any accounts, the repositories you've created on your own. So I'm, or a Bitbucket account. Both of those work really well. In fact, Sourcetree is from Atlassian that does the Bitbucket, but it works equally as well with GitHub. Now that I have this, I can see that I show no modified files here. But if I click on the master branch, you can see the complete history of what's in that master branch right now. And so this allows us to see what's there and the history of what it took to get there. We can come back to our working copy, the file status over here, and I can open this in Explorer if I were to make a change. So I open, say, this contributing MD, and I just type in, hello world into it, and I save it. I can then go back to Sourcetree, and it will pick up that change. With that, I'm able to see the change, and I can stage that here. And at this point, I could commit. Commit then gives me the changes I need, and I press the commit button. But I obviously don't want to change that. I don't want to commit that. So we're going to create a brand new repository and do many of these operations together. So I'm just going to discard this, and now it's there. So we can press the create or the clone new. At this point, I want to create a brand new repository. All right. So I'm going to cdev CodeRage slash new repo. And if I hit create, we'll have the new repository over here on the left. With that, we're able to see our working copy. And since there's no history, there's really nothing showing up under branches. We'll talk about remotes a little bit later. But I can now open an Explorer, and I can see the new repository, and it has one file in it, .git. The .git file is, or not file, it's the directory. It is where the repository is stored. And by default, it is hidden. You can kind of see that it's kind of grayed out here, maybe. So let's just create a new text document, and we'll just call it demo.txt. And with that, I can say 1 plus 1 equals 2. And then save this and exit out. And by default, you're only going to see the modified files sorted by status, but I've got new files, so I could say all, and I could see every file here, or I can see just the pending ones. So if I just select all, in this case, we'll be able to see it. I then can stage that file. I now see the file contents. I have the commit down here. That's there. I could have pressed the commit button and it'll expand it up. So this will be, this is my first commit. And I can commit that. And now I have the branch for master showing up. This is the default branch that's available. Now branching in Git is something that you will find is very natural and happens all the time. And in fact, the working model is quite often to create a branch. And merging is really quite painless. So just a heads up on that. But for right now, we're going to show it very similar to what you might use when you're using this. What we got here is a personal repository, one that tracks my changes for what I might be doing on a personal pet project. With that, let's go back to close out a notepad here. Go back to my working copy, and you can see that there's, if I go to modified, there's nothing there. We'll open and explore one more time. And I can now say, 2 plus 2 equals 4. And we'll save this. And now I also have the same thing. But here we need to show over what you see. You can see that it's recognized that I've removed, although I didn't, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and added that line plus another one. And it's smart enough to see the differences here. It's not the best diff viewer out there, but it's enough to get you close enough to do what you need to do. So I can just say added another add method. Yeah. So now if I go back to my master, I'm able to see this one or this one. And with this, I now have some unique abilities. I could quickly, here, let's just see if I still have this open. Let's go to the new repository. All right. And if I open the demo, you'll see both lines are still there. Now, if I go back to the first commit, I can check out the first branch. And this is going to call what creates a detached head. There's not a real branch here, but I can go to that specific revision if I need to. And now, if I go into that new repository and double click, I will see only that change. It's something that happens very, very quickly, and it's easy to switch back and forth. So you'll see how this says head right here. This is where you're really working, and it needs to be attached typically to a branch. Otherwise, you get unless you're just browsing to look at the files, you probably don't want to do that on a regular basis. So now I have the master here. That head or the latest revision is fine. At this point, say I need to create a new functionality. I want to add a whole new paragraph to my code. And I might want to be doing that in parallel with somebody else who's creating yet another paragraph. So branching is pretty easy. I can come in here and create a new branch. One of the things that I like to do is I like to start my branches for like feature requests with feature, and I use this reverse slash here, and then I'm able to say new para for what I'm doing. I can do this. Now you'll see two branches here, and if you'll notice the feature, this allows me to put folders so I can see those features quickly. Now if I double click on master, I will see the same thing. They're the exact same thing at this point because we haven't done it. So we're whatever's bolded is where your working copy is. So now that I have that up, I'm just going to go back to the new repository and add a new paragraph of something. We'll save that. And now as I commit, I will see that change in here again, which I can commit and say added new para. And now you'll see that they're now slightly different in the history. You'll see that the branch has the new paragraph and the master doesn't. If I switch to the master and go back to that text file, you'll see that it's missing. Now at the top here, I'm going to say added heading. And I'm going to just save this. With that, I can commit this, stage that file up, just hit commit. So I added a heading to the master branch. Now it'll show that there's a diversion between the two. It notices that the paragraph here and the new heading are different. They're heading on two parallel but distinctly different paths, which ultimately typically you don't want. Usually you want your source code to merge back together. You want the changes from two people to happen. Occasionally you might have something that you've done you want to discard, and this will end, and that's the end of your changes. But in this case, I should be able to merge the demo back into the change, and it'll say what's going to happen. And so I say, yes, that's what I want. commit immediately if there's no conflicts. And now it shows that they're back together. If I now go look at the code, it's added the heading and it has the paragraph that I added below. So this shows the way that branches easily merge and go back and forth, and we're just dealing with a simple text file. This works well with your code as well. Now I'm going to show you a little different model. All right, so I'm on the GitHub site now, and we're going to take that new repository that we created, and we're going to share it with the world, at least temporarily, through placing it out here. There's two major competitors that are out there that host Git repositories. There's many minor players that will meet your needs. Just do some searches, figure out what's best for you. But GitHub is one, and the other one is Bitbucket. Both have good Delphi open source code on them. So I'm on the GitHub site, and I'm just going to hit create new repository, and I'm going to say CodeRage demo. Demo for CodeRage right here. Now, it'll be public, and I will notice this initialize this repository with README. This will allow you to clone the repository immediately. If you skip this step if you run Git init locally. Well, in this case, we ran the local repository. So we're just going to create this repository. Okay. And I will take this URL and we will move it into Sourcetree. Okay. Now we're over here in Sourcetree. We have a remote. We can just add a new remote. A remote is where we're a remote repository. It could be another developer's machine. We can have lots of different options here. We're just going to add one. I can name whatever I'd like, but if it's the default remote, it's going to be named origin. At this point, I'm just going to paste that in, which is going to recognize that it's GitHub. If I hit OK, now I have origin. With that, I should be able to hit push. At this point, I get to choose what I want to push. Now I could push just the master branch, or I can push the new paragraph branch. Ultimately, since all of the changes of the new paragraph branch were there, I can just push the master and ignore the others. So I'm just going to do that. And with that, the changes should show up on the GitHub site. So let's do that. Let's go look. Okay, over on the site, you'll see that the CodeRage demo is here. There's one branch, and there's the master branch, and you'll see the demo text with the changes that we had. Ultimately, it's a quick and easy way to deal with that. So that's a way to get your repositories stored offsite if needed. Really quickly, we're going to go back to here, and we are going to launch RAD Studio and show you one new feature. So if I go in here, we have tools and options under RAD Studio. So this will work for both Delphi or C++ Builder. And if we scroll down, we have, and I went a little too fast, version control. And Git is one of those options. And all we have to do is specify the Git executable. And this is the command line client that we had installed. So I have Git bin, and it's out here called Git. So I've selected that. If I hit OK, now we'll just open a project. Let's go C dev CodeRage. That last demo that we did, I'm in XE7, so we'll open its project group. With this, I could come to, let's just say, the test framework unit. Oh, sorry, those are the tests. I want the unit test, and this is and with that I can click on history, and I can see every change that was made that are sitting in the Git repository and who made them. So if I were to look at the test framework, you'll see who's made the most recent changes to it and who's been working on what. You can see those here. I can do diffs. I can select if I click on the differences viewer, I can say, let's compare these two releases and see down here what's available. If you have Beyond Compare installed, there's very, very nice features up here at the top. I don't have it installed right now, but very nice features that will automatically launch this comparison and Beyond Compare. Real easy to see. Those are there. Once I make a change, so let's just go back to the contents here and go to the code. I'm going to make a change to the test framework, blah, test framework change, and I will save this. I can, over here, there's a Git menu where I can commit. I can choose to do that on a file basis, but it's easier to just go to the whole project. The Git commit from the repository root or the project directory. So I typically use the repository root. I like to commit from there. I can see that change. I can add a comment and commit it. I can also, since this is something I'm not sure what I did, well actually I am, but I can also view the difference real quick, see what I did. Close that page. I can say that's not a change I really want. I can revert it quickly before it's committed, and I have that here. So the one thing that the RAD Studio client doesn't offer is the control of the branching. But once, say, you're already in your branch, you set up your working copy the way you'd want for what you're going to work on, you launch your IDE, it will then work well as far as a tool to see the changes on a given file, which is really nice and really helpful. But it also allows us to go to the commit and do the commit if we want for that very change. Right here in the IDE, see the changes that we have. It's nice. It will pick up that we've added files here and auto add them and just get you right ready to go in that respect. It doesn't like I said, it doesn't handle the branching, and it doesn't handle the push or the pull that I've seen in any way. That you'll want to step either into the command line or another tool like Sourcetree. But then again, I don't need that in my IDE. What I need my IDE is here is just the simple stuff. Stuff to keep me moving at that level I can quickly switch to another tool to finish that off. But when I am working with the files that I'm working with are the ones that it controls. And that's what I expect personally. And let's go from there. So at this point, we're nearing the end of the presentation. So what I'm going to do is like I promised, bring you up a list of those referenced URLs. Go ahead and download that command line client. If you go to the GUIs link, you'll see a link to Sourcetree that we used. It's also available if you go to the Bitbucket site because they're also associated. They're from the same company. Even though they're the same company, Atlassian works equally as well with Atlassian's Sourcetree product works equally well with GitHub or Bitbucket. It also works equally as well with Git or Mercurial. So everything that I showed with it, if you're using a Mercurial repository, you can do it. And sometimes you don't even realize that you are. That's how easy it is with that tool. The one thing that is noticeable is inside of the Delphi IDE, there's only Git support, not Mercurial. And so you won't get the histories there. Please, this hopefully is just a brief intro of why they are different and how to possibly use them. I want to thank you for your time and thanks.
Jaron actually asked about why you chose Git versus Mercurial when it came to distributed version control.
Yeah, so
you linked to a blog post here, but if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's important. There was an excellent blog post that was years ago. I had to Google it to find it when the session was going on, and it basically compares Git to Mercurial, and it basically returns Git as if you watched the TV show MacGyver years ago, and compares Mercurial as James Bond. They both can get things done. They just do them one with different ways of doing it. Ultimately, they're very, very similar, and ultimately the reason I chose Git over Mercurial is because I had to use it first, and I got used to it.
So it just really comes down to, it sounds like it just comes down to a matter of making a choice, maybe looking at, what projects you're involved in, what they were using, or maybe what other tools you're using and a preference in that regard. But yeah. And, GitHub has the free Git hosting, but then Bitbucket has, I guess they have Mercurial and Git both, right? So
that is correct.
Yeah. So there's not, you got a lot of options, which doesn't help in the decision making. So there was some, it sounds like there were some GoToWebinar issues. Unfortunately, that sometimes GoToWebinar does that. The replay will be available in a couple of weeks, and you can come back and watch this again and get some more details on anything you may have missed.
I'm going to send right now the link to my blog, and it will have on it the slides, and it also has some of the URLs that we used as well.
Great. So you're just going to put that in the chat window?
It's in there now.
There it is. Great. Fantastic. You typically have some good blog posts too, so good for everybody to get out there and get familiar with your blog. In SVN, there is a revision number. Is there something similar in Git? We commonly put the SVN revision number in the version information of our executables.
Oh, well, that was one of my biggest pain points when I started using Git, because I did the exact same thing. There is the hash code that's there that tells us the revision, but there is not a specific number. Ultimately, we use a product here, Continua from Vsoft. It's the same company that does Final Builder, and we use its internal build number so we can still do the tracking between everything. So I know what build it went in, and we had to switch away from knowing the code, but I get that linkage through that product instead of directly like we could do before with SVN. So that is a drawback.
Yeah, the hash number identifies the code, but isn't incremental. You can't tell which is newer than the other. Is that?
So I can't put in my version number.
Yeah. Okay. I favor GitHub over Bitbucket, especially for repositories containing documentation, as GitHub allows you to have markdown files referring relative locations to images and other URLs. without getting broken. Bitbucket has struggled for years to support and still doesn't. Oh, that's good to know. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, on my little blog post there, I detail the differences of why I use one over the other at times. For cost-wise, I tend to use a lot of little small repositories, and because of that, use the Bitbucket site if I need to keep them private, because they don't price. GitHub is priced per repository, and Bitbucket's priced per user.
Right. So yeah, with Bitbucket, you can have what is a five user private repository, whereas
Right.
GitHub, if it's private at all, then you have to pay for it. So
That's right.
yeah, so it's an interesting distinction between the two, and it can be something to help influence which one you choose.
That's correct.
Brian's asking if you can configure Delphi to automatically include a git ignore file.
I don't know of that, but let me put in another URL into the chat window. Malcolm Groves did an excellent, just the IDE YouTube video.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great one.
Of just this, and I have never seen that feature there. I just never had a reason to need that. I do manage my, it's one of the first things I do, but I haven't worried about the IDE auto doing it for me, so I've just never looked for it.
So do you keep like a regular git ignore file you just keep reusing, or do you find yourself recreating it each time, or what do you find with that?
Every project's slightly different, but I always start with the same base one, and I use the one that's out on GitHub. There's a standard library of git ignore
for
files
Delphi.
for every language.
Yeah, I use that one, and then I ended up editing it. That's what I do too.
Because there's always something different. I even committed a couple changes to it not too long ago.
I didn't even think about that. That's a good idea, because there's a few things that I regularly am doing with that one. So Keith says the distributed briefcase model works for open source projects because no one is being paid any money. Example, one published request is picked up by 10 developers, and when they all commit their versions, usually only one is used, and the other 9's work is largely waste. So I guess I don't find this distributed model very compelling. Great presentation, though.
If it's not compelling, then I can't say anything about it. We have a team of 10 here, and we still use a little Subversion, and we still use a little of Git. We have our Git hosted behind the firewall.
Go ahead.
And it works.
Something I've talked to some people that have switched from Subversion to Git, and they weren't doing open source projects; they're doing, closed source projects. And they said the biggest thing for them was the way Git handles branching, as opposed to Subversion. And
it's night and day.
Yeah.
It's huge to switch back and forth between the revisions. Right now, on my repository that's still in SVN, I have a copy that's in Git, but we're not using it. We're just getting ready to move. It takes 45 minutes to do a checkout. The repository's huge. And it's about 30 minutes to switch. I said it in the presentation. If I switch, and we're switching branches all the time here with SVN, so it's time consuming and tedious and annoying. And with Git, it's almost instantaneous. And so it's hard to ignore that.
Yeah. When it comes to branching and merging, because of the way they work fundamentally, they are able to handle branching and merging just so much better. So someone's asking if RAD Studio will support Team Foundation Server. I think I saw there's a plugin that does that, isn't there?
I've never seen. I don't have Team Foundation Server, so I don't even. It's not something that's even on our radar.
It seems like I remember, actually, I have a friend that does some Team Foundation consulting, and he asked me the other day, a couple years ago, about a Delphi plugin for that. Delphi Team Foundation Server. Source Connection by apocalypse.com.
So there's a third-party tool that will allow it to happen.
Most demos I've seen have tidy demos involving text files where merging seems relatively easy, as it would be with a pass file. Do you find merging DFM files, which I've occasionally found tricky in SVN. Or how have you found that? Does Git manage that easier?
Nothing handles DFM well when somebody's changing the same areas. Same thing with source code. If two people are changing the exact same method, I will get a conflict. It does pretty well if I'm adding a new button on the form and somebody else has added an event to something else that's already on the form. That merges really well. But say I add an event and they add an event with a different name, the same event though, but they named it differently. We're going to conflict and it's just going to be manually merged. I've never seen a way around that.
Version control under tools options is only available in XE7?
That is correct. Well, SVN's been there for several versions. I just know Git is just XE7. I do not know when it started, though.
I use SVN and can see some nice things about Sourcetree versus Subversion. Did I miss why Git might be better than Subversion?
We've kind of discussed that a couple of times now in the QA, but Git does things locally. So I can deal with the fact if I need to take my stuff on the road or work in a disconnected environment, it's much easier to work. It makes branching, etc., fast.
So I'll say I work on spare time on an organization that has its own server, and today we have Subversion repository. Seems like with Git you must upload source code to open source repositories. Is it possible to set up your own Git server for your own use?
Yeah. So if you go to my blog post, I'll show you, and the one that's showing right now on the screen, the GitHub or the Bitbucket, you can pay for and get private versions. I also have on my blog post there a link to a Bombo server that we use internally, and then somebody commented on something called gitblit.com that you can host internally, and it looks far superior to anything that I've ever used. And we're interested, but I've never heard of it until that comment. And that allows you to host it internally behind your firewall if you want to.
So Jeron's posted a whole lot of useful links. Git Mercurial are great for working and not always being online. Yes. So you can keep working if you're not online. Duplicate work isn't a function of the source control. Manage that through a bug tracking system. Yes, that's true. Source connection is not available for XE6 or XE7. Well, send them an email. Send them an email and ask them to update. And I'll do that too, and maybe we'll get them to update. It would be great if RAD supported Team Foundation Server the way it does Git and Subversion. Here's another plugin that supports Team Foundation Server. Great. Good suggestion. There's always, I've been in some of the meetings where they're talking about feature plans and what they're going to support. And it's not that we're like, hey, we don't like Team Foundation Server. It's just a matter of we can only implement so many features and have to pick and choose. So who knows? In the future, might be there. Right now, unfortunately, it's not. Distributed version control systems know about the changes to a file and have the whole change tree locally, so are far better at merging than a state-based system like Subversion, though Subversion has gotten better over the years. From here on, thank you. I missed the Bluetooth as well. This current session, will it be available for download? Yes, all the sessions will be available for replay in a couple weeks. They'll be on YouTube, and you can use different utilities for downloading from YouTube if you want to watch them offline. Let's see. The whole trick with any version control system mechanism is to split work in such a way that you make the merges to be in disparate pieces of your code, even when in the same file. Even though Git and Mercurial are far better at merging than, for instance, SVN and SVS and Team Foundation, each merge has risk. Sure.
I would agree.
There never is a magic echo. Bruce is getting an echo, sorry. There never is a magic bullet that just does everything. You still have to do some work. And Here, some more links. Thanks. Yeah, license for it and tried to use it, but no support. Okay, so Igor's saying that Source Connection doesn't do that, but there is another link that was the cns.de that has a Team Foundation server for as well. Team Foundation server for Delphi as well. All right, lots of great, good information in here. Thank you, everybody, for sharing some links. So definitely want to check out the chat log. Actually, I noticed that Jeroen has been posting some of the chat logs from today. So check out his blog post if you missed some links that were in the chat log, or maybe missed a session. You want to just go back and grab some of the links from that. That can be helpful. So thank you, Robert, for that overview of Git and distributed version control systems.
No problem. It was fun to do.
Yeah. And then that link you did post in there for YouTube, I'll post that in the chat log again, is the video showing more about specifically with Delphi's support for Git in the IDE.